that this invisible man, Mr. Ian McGregor, keeps his job and gets government support.
Indications of so-called opinion, whenever there's been a proper opinion poll done, in particular whenever there's been a poll of school children, you've found the majority do want to retain corporal punishment. Now, quite frankly, Jimmy, I've found in quite a number of schools where they do have corporal punishment, it's very rarely used at all. Yeah. It's there as a kind of deterrent, and it seems to work. And at the end of the day, I think the people we should listen to are not European judges, not people who are campaigners, but the actual teachers in the classroom who've got the difficult job of controlling a class of teenagers nowadays. It's not an easy job.
Well, now, where does this leave the government? Now, we've got this sort of two-tier bill, if you like, which everybody has said all along is well, not unworkable. Well, yes, some people do say it's unworkable, certainly very difficult to work. So where does this leave that, I wonder?
I think it shows just how totally unworkable the bill is going to be, because if, for example, you had that poll carried out, it would mean in the average class you might have 2 children out of 3 who were subject to corporal punishment if required, and possibly up to 1/3 who weren't. Now, just imagine the problem for a teacher who finds perhaps 3 youngsters breaking a window and thinks that corporal punishment will be appropriate. He has to rush along to his school office to find who is on which list, and then he'll have to give different punishments to different children. Now, of course, teachers won't do this, and I think if we allow the bill to go ahead, what will basically happen is that corporal punishment will disappear because the whole thing will be unworkable. I think it's a shame, not because we want to punish children, but because we want to make sure that the child who wants to learn and the parents who are concerned about the children learning should have a fair chance. There's nothing more upsetting than a small handful of children making it impossible for the others to learn.
But then if it doesn't go ahead, don't we then run foul of the European Court of Human Rights?
This is the great problem. I think what we really should do is to drop the legislation just now and have a meeting with all the people who are signatories of the European Court and try and persuade them to get the convention changed so that the European Court would only have power where they were meant to have power, and that's things like unlawful imprisonment, torture, things like that. The trouble with courts, European courts of this sort, is they extend their powers almost weekly. This is what's been happening in Strasbourg, and it's been happening with the other court too. The moment you set up an organization like this, they extend their powers to cover more things than were intended. So what I think we should do, faced with the present situation, is to have a meeting with all the countries who signed the convention and say, look, let's try and limit this convention to what it was originally intended to. It certainly wasn't meant to lay down rules for maintaining discipline in English classrooms.
In the meantime, Teddy, what do we do about this bill? Because, of course, it's due to come into force next year, isn't it?
Well, the bill is going through its committee stage at the present time. It's not law, and it won't be law until about July. And, of course, a lot can happen between now and then. I think you'll find that, although the bill went through in the Parliament, I didn't find one single person who thought it was a good idea. And so, therefore, we've got about 3 or 4 months to try and persuade the government to drop this silly measure and do what they should do, and that is have a discussion with the people who signed the European Convention. I think I should say, in fairness, Jimmy, this is not the common market. If it was the common market, then their decision would have to apply.
Right.
This is the European Convention, which is a different group, and it would be possible, we can withdraw for any time we want, it would be possible to have a meeting of all the countries and try and persuade them that we should restrict the court to real issues of things like torture and human rights, not issues like the maintenance of classroom discipline. The right people to decide that are our teachers and our parents, not elderly European judges.
It's an item on which we'll get a lot of comment, I can promise you. Nice to talk to you again, Teddy. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Right you are. Teddy Taylor, Conservative MP for Southend East, on the subject of corporal punishment in school. 10 minutes to 12, exactly.
When hundreds of youths surrounded the police station, bottles of bricks rained down and petrol bombs were thrown. Squads of officers in Riot helmets carrying shields have now moved in. 200 yards away, 5 cars have been set on fire, a burning mass blocking off Brixton Road. Smoke is rising from some of the side streets around. The missiles and the petrol bombs keep coming. Antonia, Higgs, IRN, Brixton.
Deputy Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Wells says it's impossible to guarantee that accidental shootings will not happen again. 9 o'clock news, this is Paul Woodley. The policeman appointed to investigate the police shooting of a woman in Brixton in South London early today has tonight been forced to leave the area as rioting spreads through the streets. He's Assistant Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, John DeMail, who's attempted to visit the house in Brixton where the woman, Cherry Groce, was wounded during a raid by police looking for her son on a firearms offence. But crowds forced him to leave as violence on the streets continued to spread. The worst trouble is around Brixton Police Station, from where Antonia Higgs reports.
There is trouble all over the area surrounding Brixton Police Station. Wooden pillars, bricks, stones and other debris litter the roads, and as the fire brigade fight desperately to put out the blaze that has engulfed the shop close to the tube station, the barrage continues. Journalists have been attacked, one stabbed, another badly beaten up with his nose broken. 3 policemen have also been injured. Their condition isn't known yet. And now, as one more group of officers comes under attack, reinforcements are arriving. But the situation is in no way under control yet. Antonia Higgs, IRN, Brixton. There is trouble all over the area surrounding Brixton Police Station. Wooden pillars, bricks, stones and other debris litter the roads. And as the fire brigade fight desperately to put out the blaze that has engulfed the shop close to the tube station, the barrage continues. Journalists have been attacked, one stabbed, another badly beaten up with his nose broken. 3 policemen have also been injured. Their condition isn't known yet. And now, as one more group of officers comes under attack, reinforcements are arriving. But the situation is in no way under control yet. Antonia Higgs, IRN, Brixton.
Concerned about the underlying reasoning behind your question and are considering very carefully if there's anything further we can do.
A police lawyer is accusing the family of a woman who died during a raid by officers at Tottenham in North London of bringing about her death themselves. The accusation was made at an inquest on the woman, Mrs. Cynthia Jarrett, after a claim by her relatives that she collapsed after being pushed by a policeman. Antonia Higgs reports.
Mrs. Jarrett's younger son, Michael, told the court that his mother was gasping and unable to talk when he arrived home. Officers, he said, had done nothing to help her, and he told them forcefully to get out. Counsel for the police told him, "Your sister had created an atmosphere of pressure which you added to. That led to a raising of the temperature, which resulted in your mother's death." But Mr. Jarrett replied, "That's not true." Meanwhile, one of the policemen who carried out the search has denied repeated family claims that they were not shown a warrant. PC Christopher Casey says at one point he gave the warrant to Mrs. Jarrett's daughter Patricia. The hearing will continue on Monday.
I don't know why you bothered to have human beings on this programme. You people get robots to make these remarks and say... I just think that it's rather the problem of this programme, you know, that when you get people saying the opposite things to each other, it is, it isn't, I did, I didn't, I do, I don't... it does descend, because by the natural moronicism of the arguments, it does occasionally descend to violence. And I
never.
No, not
I do assure you there's never been any violence in this programme. There's never been any injury.
But it jolly well does, where you get just people with fixed ideas confronting each other, saying one thing, then the opposite, then the opposite. And I think that's what's happened with all these wretched, stylized attitudes, formalized attitudes, frozen attitudes, and they sit confronting each other saying yes, no, and whereupon, no doubt, Mr. Astor says, this is our opportunity, we're going to unblock the whole system and all the rest of it. But I think it's a sickness which is, we've just been going around a long time, and politics has descended to that. And personally, I rather giggle when I see them punching each other instead of boring us all stiff, arguing at each other. I personally actually don't mind at all, but I can see that others would be deeply shocked.
About fighting with each other.
David Astor?
Well, the problem both with Mr. Tebbit and Mr. Kinnock fighting each other, and I think it was Mr. Howell and Mr. Smith fighting in Europe, is that they are fighting each other, attacking each other, rather than attacking the problems. And this is actually just typical of the two-party system that has prevailed in the past. If we had a more realistic system with proportional representation... Thank you. Then you wouldn't have people nationalising, privatising, denationalising, going from one to the other, and you wouldn't have quite the sort of Yabu sucks element of politics, because you'd have a more balanced approach, and this is something that we desperately need in this country.